Hello, and welcome to Sleepy Philosophy. Tonight, we embark on a gentle journey into the depths of one of philosophy's most misunderstood territories, a realm where meaning dissolves, where purpose fades, and where the very foundations of existence seem to crumble beneath our feet. This is nihilism, and I promise you it's not quite the monster you might think it is. Before we begin, as always, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment below and tell me what time it is in your corner of existence. There's something beautifully ironic about connecting across the globe to discuss a philosophy that suggests connection itself might be meaningless. But we'll explore that paradox together. If this gentle exploration into the darker corners of human thought brings you comfort or insight, consider leaving a like. It helps other restless minds find their way here. And if you'd like to join me for more philosophical wanderings in the future, the subscribe button is always there, waiting patiently like an existential question mark. So settle in. Let the weight of your blankets anchor you to this moment, while your mind prepares to float through concepts that might seem weightless. Take a deep breath, and let's begin our journey into the beautiful darkness of nihilistic thought. Picture, if you will, a traveller standing at the edge of a vast desert at twilight. The sand stretches endlessly in all directions, unmarked by footprints or signposts. There are no roads leading anywhere specific, no destinations that call out with promises of meaning or purpose. This traveller, this wanderer in the philosophical wilderness, represents each of us as we encounter nihilism for the first time. The desert represents existence itself, stripped of the comfortable illusions we usually drape over it. Nihilism whispers to us in the quiet moments. It's the voice that asks, during a particularly mundane Tuesday afternoon, whether any of this really matters. It's the thought that creeps in when we're staring at our reflection in the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m, wondering if there's any inherent purpose to the person staring back. It's the philosophy that dares to suggest that perhaps, just perhaps, the universe doesn't care about our plans, our dreams, or our carefully constructed meanings. But here's where we must pause and breathe. Nihilism is not the villain in this story, is not the philosophical equivalent of a storm cloud rolling in to ruin our picnic. Instead, think of nihilism as a mirror, reflecting back to us the assumptions we've never questioned. It's the child in the crowd who points out that the emperor is wearing no clothes, except in this case, the emperor is existence itself, and the clothes are the meanings we've tailored to fit our desperate need for purpose. The word nihilism comes from the Latin nihil, meaning nothing. But this nothing is not empty in the way we might fear. It's not the nothing of absence or loss. Instead, it's the nothing of pure potential, of space cleared for something entirely new to emerge. When we strip away all the inherited meanings, all the societal expectations, all the religious frameworks and cultural narratives, what remains is not a void but a canvas. Friedrich Nietzsche, though often misunderstood as a nihilist himself, actually saw nihilism as a necessary stage in human development. He viewed it as a kind of philosophical fever, a crisis that humanity had to pass through in order to emerge stronger and more authentic. Like a forest fire that clears away the old growth to make room for new life, nihilism burns away the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about inherent meaning and cosmic purpose. Now you might be wondering why anyone would willingly embrace such a perspective. Why would we choose to see existence as fundamentally meaningless? The answer lies not in the embrace of meaninglessness itself, but in what happens when we truly accept it. When we stop expecting the universe to hand us a purpose on a silver platter, we become free to create our own. When we stop waiting for external validation of our choices, we become the authors of our own stories. Think of a musician sitting before a piano. The keys themselves have no inherent melody. They don't naturally produce beautiful music or ugly noise. They simply exist as potential. It's only when the musician's fingers dance across them that music emerges. Similarly, nihilism suggests that existence is like those silent keys, waiting for us to create something beautiful, terrible, or mundane. The music doesn't exist in the piano, it exists in the playing. This realization can be profoundly liberating. If there's no predetermined script for your life, then you're free to improvise. If there's no cosmic judge grading your performance, then you can experiment without fear of failure. If there's no ultimate meaning that you must discover and fulfill, then every meaning you create becomes equally valid and equally precious. But let's not pretend this liberation comes without cost. Nihilism can feel like standing on the edge of an intellectual cliff, looking down into an abyss that seems to swallow all comfort and certainty. It can feel like watching the sun set on every belief you've ever held dear. There's a reason why nihilism has often been associated with despair and depression. When you realise that the safety net of inherent meaning might be an illusion, the fall can feel terrifying. Yet here's where the journey becomes interesting. Many who venture into nihilistic territory discover something unexpected. They find that life doesn't become less beautiful when stripped of cosmic significance. Instead, it becomes more precious precisely because it's temporary and self-created. A sunset doesn't need to mean anything beyond its own fleeting beauty to move us to tears. Love doesn't require validation from the universe to transform our hearts. Art doesn't need to serve some grand purpose to bring joy and wonder into existence. The nihilistic perspective invites us to see ourselves as artists of existence. Every choice we make is a brushstroke on the canvas of our lives. Every relationship we build is a note in the symphony of our experience. Every moment of kindness or cruelty, every laugh or tear, every quiet contemplation or burst of passion becomes significant not because it serves some external purpose, but because we've chosen to make it significant. This shift in perspective can feel like learning to see colour for the first time. What once seemed grey and meaningless suddenly becomes vibrant with possibility. The weight of having to find the one true meaning of life lifts, replaced by the joyful responsibility of creating meanings that resonate with who we are and who we want to become. Consider how this applies to our relationships. Traditional frameworks often suggest that we love others because we're supposed to, because it's written into our nature, or because some higher power commands it. Nihilism suggests a different possibility. We love not because we must, but because we choose to. And that choice, made freely in full knowledge that the universe doesn't require it, becomes more beautiful and more meaningful than any love commanded by cosmic law. The same principle applies to our work, our creativity, our acts of kindness, and our pursuit of knowledge. When we stop doing these things because we believe they are inherently important, and start doing them because we've decided they're important to us, they become expressions of our authentic selves rather than performances for an imaginary audience. This is where nihilism reveals its unexpected wisdom. By stripping away the illusion of inherent meaning, it doesn't destroy meaning itself. Instead, it reveals meaning as something we create, something we choose, something we're responsible for. And this responsibility, rather than being a burden, becomes a source of tremendous freedom and creativity. The nihilistic journey often begins with a sense of loss. We mourn the comfortable certainties we once held. We grieve the simple answers to complex questions. We feel unmoored in a universe that seems indifferent to our existence. But as we continue on this path, many discover that what felt like loss was actually a shedding of unnecessary weight. What seemed like emptiness was actually spaciousness. What appeared to be meaninglessness was actually the raw material from which genuine meaning could be crafted. Think of it as moving from a furnished apartment to an empty house. At first, the empty house feels cold and unwelcoming. There's nowhere comfortable to sit, no familiar objects to provide comfort, no ready-made atmosphere to embrace you. But gradually you realise that this emptiness is also possibility. Every room can become whatever you choose to make it. Every corner can reflect your authentic preferences rather than someone else's taste. The house becomes truly department never could. This is the yours in a way that the furnished gift that nihilism offers to those brave enough to accept it. Not the gift of answers, but the gift of questions. Not the comfort of certainty, but the excitement of possibility. Not the security of predetermined meaning, but the adventure of creating meaning that truly reflects who we are and who we aspire to become. As we drift deeper into this exploration, we'll discover that nihilism is not the end of the philosophical journey, but rather a crucial way station. It's the place where we learn to let go of what never truly belonged to us so that we can embrace what does. It's where we discover that the absence of inherent meaning doesn't make life less worth living, but rather makes every moment we choose to find meaningful a small act of rebellion against an indifferent cosmos. Tonight, as you listen to these words, you're participating in this act of rebellion. You're choosing to find value in ideas, comfort in contemplation, and meaning in the shared human experience of wondering about our place in a vast and mysterious universe. And that choice, made freely and without cosmic mandate, is perhaps more beautiful than any meaning that could be imposed from outside. So let us wander further into this philosophical landscape, where the familiar landmarks of certainty have dissolved into mist. Here, in this territory that some call desolate and others call liberating, we encounter the profound silence that nihilism brings. It's not the silence of absence, but the silence of a world holding its breath, waiting to see what we might create from nothing. Imagine yourself as an archaeologist of meaning, carefully brushing away centuries of accumulated assumptions. Layer by layer, you uncover the foundations upon which your beliefs have been built. Religious frameworks, cultural traditions, social expectations, family legacies. Each layer, tell Satan, reveals a story, each stir the sediment of inherited purpose. But as you dig deeper, you begin to wonder, what lies beneath it all? What remains when you've excavated every external source of meaning? This is where the nihilistic archaeologist makes their most startling discovery. Beneath all the layers of imposed significance, there is not some ultimate bedrock of cosmic truth. Instead, there is space. Clean, clear, unlimited space. The kind of space that makes some people panic and others dance with joy. The space of pure possibility. Friedrich Nietzsche described this moment as standing before an abyss. But he also suggested that when you stare into the abyss long enough, something remarkable happens. You realize that you are not separate from it. You're not standing on solid ground looking down into emptiness. You're part of the vastness itself. The abyss is not something to fear, but something to inhabit, to explore, to make your home within. This shift in perspective transforms everything. The question is no longer what is the meaning of life, but rather what meaning will I give to this moment, this choice, this breath. The focus moves from discovery to creation, from finding to making, from receiving to giving. And in this shift, something beautiful happens. The weight of cosmic responsibility lifts, replaced by the lighter, more playful responsibility of artistic creation. Consider a child building a sandcastle on the beach. The child knows, perhaps better than any adult, that the tide will eventually wash away their creation. The ocean doesn't care about their architectural vision. The universe is indifferent to their careful placement of turrets and walls. Yet the child builds anyway, not despite this knowledge, but in full acceptance of it. The impermanence doesn't make the building meaningless. It makes the building precious precisely because it is temporary, chosen, and created with full awareness of its fleeting nature. This is the wisdom that nihilism can teach us if we listen carefully enough. Not that nothing matters, but that things matter because we choose to make them matter. Not that life is pointless, but that we are the ones who create the points, who connect the dots, who draw the lines that give shape to our experience. The nihilistic journey often leads people through what philosophers call the dark night of the soul. It's a period of profound disorientation where all the familiar guideposts seem to have vanished. The moral frameworks that once provided clear direction become questionable. The purposes that once drove us forward seem arbitrary. The relationships that once felt cosmically significant reveal themselves as choices we made and continue to make. During this dark night, it's natural to feel lost. Imagine walking through a dense forest at midnight, where every tree looks like every other tree, where every path seems to lead in circles, where the stars are hidden by clouds and offer no navigation. This is how the soul feels when it first encounters the full implications of nihilistic thought. Everything that once provided direction seems to have disappeared. But here's what many discover as they continue walking through this dark forest. Their eyes begin to adjust. What seemed like impenetrable darkness reveals subtle variations in shadow and light. What felt like pathless wilderness shows traces of trails, not carved by some external authority, but worn smooth by other travellers who have passed this way before. The forest doesn't become less mysterious, but it becomes more navigable. Not because someone has installed streetlights and signposts, but because we've learned to see in the dark. This learned ability to navigate without external reference points becomes one of nihilism's greatest gifts. It teaches us to rely on our own moral compass, not because that compass is cosmically validated, but because it's the only navigation system we truly possess. It shows us how to make decisions based on our authentic values, rather than inherited expectations. It reveals how to build relationships based on genuine choice, rather than social obligation. The nihilistic perspective can transform how we view suffering and joy, success and failure, love and loss. Traditional frameworks often try to explain these experiences by placing them within larger narratives of cosmic justice or divine plan. Nihilism suggests a different approach. These experiences don't need external justification to be valid. Suffering doesn't need to serve some higher purpose to be worth acknowledging and addressing. Joy doesn't need cosmic approval to be worth celebrating. When we embrace this perspective, something remarkable happens to our relationship with both pain and pleasure. Pain becomes more bearable because we stop asking it to justify itself or teach us lessons it was never meant to teach. We can simply acknowledge it, sit with it, and respond to it with whatever compassion and wisdom we can muster. Pleasure becomes more vivid because we stop worrying about whether we deserve it or whether it serves some higher purpose. We can simply receive it with gratitude for its temporary presence in our lives. This transformation extends to how we view our achievements and failures. In a nihilistic framework, success doesn't make you a better person in some cosmic sense, and failure doesn't diminish your inherent worth. Both are simply experiences, temporary conditions that arise and pass away like weather patterns in the sky of consciousness. This perspective can be profoundly liberating for those who have spent their lives chasing external validation or running from the fear of judgment. Consider how this applies to creative endeavours. The artist working from a nihilistic perspective doesn't create because they believe their art will save the world or because they think beauty has some inherent cosmic importance. They create because creation brings them joy, because it feels authentic to their nature, because the act of making something from nothing mirrors the larger human project of making meaning from meaninglessness. The art doesn't need to be great or important or lasting. It just needs to be chosen, engaged with, and offered to the world as a gift with no strings attached. The same principle applies to acts of kindness and compassion. We don't help others because we believe the universe requires it, or because we think it will earn us cosmic points. We help because helping feels aligned with who we choose to be. We show compassion because compassion enriches our own experience of being human. We practice love because love transforms both the giver and the receiver, regardless of whether it serves any larger purpose. This shift from obligation to choice, or from cosmic requirement to personal authenticity, can make our actions more genuine and more sustainable. When we do good things because we believe we should, there's often an underlying resentment or sense of burden. When we do good things because we've chosen to find them meaningful, they become expressions of our authentic selves rather than performances for an imaginary audience. Nihilism also offers a unique perspective on death and impermanence. Traditional frameworks often struggle with mortality, either denying it through promises of afterlife or trying to minimize its significance. Nihilism faces death directly, acknowledging it as the ultimate horizon that gives shape to every moment. But rather than making life feel pointless, this acknowledgement can make every experience more precious. When we truly accept that our time here is limited and that the universe will continue long after we're gone, each moment becomes like a rare flower blooming in a vast desert. Its beauty isn't diminished by its temporary nature. If anything, its brevity makes it more poignant, more worthy of attention, more deserving of our full presence and appreciation. This acceptance of impermanence can transform how we approach relationships, work, and personal growth. Instead of frantically trying to create something permanent and lasting, we can focus on being fully present to whatever is arising now. Instead of building monuments to our ego, we can engage authentically with the people and experiences that are available to us in this moment. The nihilistic approach to personal growth is particularly interesting. Rather than trying to become some idealized version of ourselves that we imagine the universe prefers, we can focus on becoming more authentic expressions of who we actually are. This doesn't mean giving up on improvement or settling for mediocrity. It means choosing our growth based on what genuinely resonates with us, rather than what we think we should want. As we continue our gentle descent into nihilistic territory, we begin to see that this philosophy doesn't destroy the human experience, but rather strips it down to its essential elements. What remains after this stripping away is not nothing, but everything that has ever truly mattered to us. The love we feel for others doesn't disappear when we stop believing it's cosmically mandated. The beauty we perceive in art and nature doesn't vanish when we realize it exists primarily in our own consciousness. The joy we take in learning and growing doesn't diminish when we understand that knowledge doesn't need to serve some grand purpose to be worth pursuing. If anything, these experiences become more vivid and more precious when we realize they exist because we've chosen to value them, not because some external authority has commanded us to do so. They become expressions of our unique perspective on existence, rather than obligations we must fulfill to satisfy cosmic requirements. This is perhaps the most profound gift that nihilism offers, the recognition that we are not passive recipients of predetermined meaning, but active creators of significance. We are not tourists in someone else's universe, but artists in our own gallery. We are not actors reading from a script we didn't write, but improvisers making up the dialogue as we go along. And in this recognition lies both tremendous responsibility and tremendous freedom. Responsibility because we can no longer blame our choices on external authorities. Freedom because we can no longer be limited by what others insist we should find meaningful. The canvas is blank, the stage is empty, the page is waiting. What we create from here is entirely up to us. Tonight, as we drift deeper into nihilistic waters, let us explore what happens when we truly embrace this philosophy of nothingness. Not as a destination way, but as a door. Not as an ending, but as a beginning that we've been too afraid to walk through. Picture yourself standing in an art gallery where all the paintings have been removed. The walls are bare, the spotlights illuminate nothing but empty space, and the little placards that once explained what each piece meant have been taken down. Your first instinct might be to feel cheated, to wonder where all the meaning has gone. But if you stand there long enough, something curious happens. You begin to see the gallery itself, the elegant curve of the ceiling, the way light falls across the floor, the subtle texture of the walls. What seemed like emptiness reveals itself to be a space of infinite possibility. This is what nihilism offers us when we stop fighting it and start listening to what it has to teach. It removes the paintings of inherited meaning so we can see the gallery of existence itself. It takes down the explanatory placards so we can experience life directly rather than through someone else's interpretation. The German philosopher Max Stirner, writing in the 19th century, suggested that we are haunted by what he called spooks. These are the abstract concepts and inherited ideas that control our behaviour, even though they have no real substance. God, state, society, morality, progress. These spooks whisper in our ears, telling us what we should value, how we should behave, what we should strive for. Nihilism is the philosophical exorcist that banishes these ghosts, leaving us alone with our own authentic experience. But being alone with our authentic experience can feel terrifying at first. It's like being a child who has always slept with a nightlight suddenly finding themselves in complete darkness. Every shadow seems threatening. Every sound seems ominous. We reach for the familiar switches of inherited meaning, but they no longer illuminate anything. This is the nihilistic dark night of the soul, and it's a necessary passage for anyone who wants to discover their own light. During this passage, we often experience what we might call existential vertigo. It's the dizzying sensation that comes from realizing there's no solid ground beneath our feet, no fixed reference point to orient ourselves by. The moral certainties we once clung to reveal themselves as human constructions. The purposes that once drove us forward show themselves to be arbitrary choices. Even our sense of self begins to feel less solid, more fluid, more questionable. This vertigo can be profoundly unsettling, but it can also be profoundly liberating. When you realize that the ground you thought was solid was actually quicksand, you also realize that you've been floating all along. You've been held up not by external supports, but by your own buoyancy, your own capacity to navigate the fluid medium of existence. The existentialist philosophers who came after the early nihilists understood this liberation intimately. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of being condemned to be free, recognizing that our freedom to create meaning is both a gift and a burden. Simone de Beauvoir explored how this freedom applies differently to different people, how social conditions can constrain our ability to exercise our existential liberty. Albert Camus found in this freedom a reason to revolt against the absurdity of existence, not by denying it, but by embracing it fully. Each of these thinkers began their philosophical journey by walking through nihilistic territory. They didn't stop there, but they understood that you cannot build authentic meaning without first clearing away the inherited assumptions that masquerade as truth. You cannot discover your authentic self without first acknowledging that the self you thought you were might be largely a construction of social expectations and cultural conditioning. This process of deconstruction and reconstruction is not a one-time event but an ongoing practice. Life keeps presenting us with new situations that challenge our constructed meanings. Love relationships that don't follow the scripts we learned from movies. Career paths that lead nowhere we expected. Losses that no philosophy can fully explain or justify. Each of these experiences invites us back into the nihilistic space of questioning, back into the gallery with empty walls. But here's what becomes beautiful about repeated visits to this space. We get better at navigating it. We learn to see emptiness not as absence, but as potential. We develop what we might call nihilistic confidence, the ability to remain centered and creative even when all external sources of meaning have been stripped away. We become like experienced sailors who can navigate by the stars even when the compass fails. This nihilistic confidence manifests in surprising ways. We become less defensive about our choices because we understand they don't need cosmic justification. We become more curious about other people's perspectives because we realize their meanings are as valid as our own. We become more present to immediate experience because we're not constantly filtering it through abstract frameworks of significance. Consider how this confidence might transform your approach to failure and success. When you truly understand that neither success nor failure has inherent meaning, both become simply information about what happens when you take certain actions. Success doesn't make you a better person, and failure doesn't diminish your worth. Both are temporary conditions that arise from the intersection of your choices with the complex web of circumstances that surround you. This perspective doesn't make you apathetic about outcomes. If anything, it can make you more strategic and less emotional in your decision-making. You can pursue goals because you've chosen to find them interesting or fulfilling, not because you believe the universe requires you to achieve them. You can abandon goals that no longer serve you without feeling like you're disappointing some cosmic authority. The nihilistic approach to relationships is equally transformative. When you realize that love doesn't need to be justified by destiny or cosmic plan, it becomes more precious, not less. You love someone not because you're supposed to, not because it serves some higher purpose, but because you've chosen to value your connection with them. This choice, made freely and renewed daily, becomes more meaningful than any love that claims to be written in the stars. Similarly, friendships become more authentic when they're not based on social obligations or shared beliefs about inherent meaning. You spend time with people because you enjoy their company, because they enrich your experience, because connecting with them feels like a creative act that adds something beautiful to the world. The friendship doesn't need to last forever or serve some greater purpose. It just needs to be chosen, moment by moment, encounter by encounter. This choosiness, this constant selection and reselection of what we find meaningful, becomes the core skill of nihilistic living. It's like being a curator of your own existence, constantly deciding what deserves space in the gallery of your attention and what can be quietly removed. Some meanings you'll display prominently for years. Others you'll enjoy briefly and then let go. All of them are valid because all of them are chosen. The practice of curation extends to how we engage with suffering and difficulty. Traditional frameworks often try to give suffering inherent meaning by claiming it serves some higher purpose or teaches us necessary lessons. Nihilism suggests a different approach. Suffering doesn't need to mean anything beyond the immediate experience of suffering. But within that experience, we can choose how to respond. We can choose to meet pain with compassion, difficulty with creativity, loss with grace, not because these responses are cosmically required, but because they align with who we've chosen to become. This approach can be profoundly healing for people who have spent years trying to find meaning in traumatic experiences. The trauma doesn't need to have happened for a reason. It doesn't need to have made you stronger or taught you important lessons. It can simply be acknowledged as something that happened, something that caused pain, something that deserves compassion and care. From that acknowledgement, you can choose how to carry the experience forward, what role you want it to play in the story you're creating about your life. The nihilistic perspective on creativity is particularly rich. When you realize that art doesn't need to serve beauty, express truth, or communicate important messages, it becomes pure play. You can create simply because creating feels good, because it engages your faculties in satisfying ways, because it produces something that wasn't there before. The creation doesn't need to be great or lasting or appreciated by others. It just needs to be chosen, engaged with, and offered to the world as a gift with no expectations attached. This freedom from external validation can unleash tremendous creative energy. When you're not trying to create something meaningful in some objective sense, you can focus on creating something that feels authentic to your current experience. When you're not worried about whether your art will last or be remembered, you can be fully present to the process of making it. When you're not concerned with impressing others or serving some higher purpose, you can experiment, play, and discover what emerges from your unique intersection with the creative moment. The same principle applies to how we approach learning and intellectual growth. Knowledge doesn't need to make us better people or serve some grand purpose to be worth pursuing. We can learn simply because learning satisfies our curiosity, because it expands our capacity to appreciate complexity, because it connects us with the accumulated wisdom of other human beings who have grappled with similar questions. The knowledge doesn't need to be practical or immediately applicable. It just needs to be interesting to us in this moment. This approach to learning can be deeply satisfying because it removes the pressure to justify our intellectual interests. You can study ancient philosophy not because it will make you a better person, but because the questions fascinate you. You can learn about quantum physics not because you plan to use it practically, but because the concepts stretch your imagination in delightful ways. You can explore poetry not because it will improve your communication skills, but because the play of language creates experiences you can't find anywhere else. As we move deeper into our exploration, we begin to see how nihilism functions not as a philosophy of despair, but as a philosophy of radical responsibility. When there's no external authority to blame for your choices, you become fully accountable for the life you create. When there's no predetermined path to follow, every step becomes a conscious decision. When there's no inherent meaning to discover, every meaning you create becomes a reflection of your authentic values and preferences. This responsibility can feel overwhelming at first. It's much easier to live according to external guidelines than to constantly choose your own direction. It's more comfortable to follow inherited meanings than to create new ones. It's less demanding to blame your circumstances on fate or cosmic justice than to acknowledge your role in shaping your experience. But this responsibility is also the source of tremendous empowerment. If you are the author of your own meanings, then you can revise the story whenever it stops serving you. The nihilistic journey often leads to what we might call existential adulthood. Just as psychological maturity involves taking responsibility for your emotional responses and life choices, existential maturity involves taking responsibility for the meanings and values that guide your existence. You stop waiting for someone else to tell you what's important and start deciding for yourself. You stop looking for external validation of your choices and start trusting your own judgment. You stop expecting life to make sense according to some predetermined logic and start making your own sense of it. This maturation process is gradual and ongoing. We don't wake up one morning fully equipped to handle existential responsibility. We develop the capacity slowly, through practice and reflection, through making mistakes and learning from them, through experimenting with different meanings and seeing how they feel to live with. It's like developing any other skill. The more we practice choosing our own meanings, the more confident our own values and creating and skillful we become at it. The community aspect of nihilistic living is fascinating. When you understand that everyone is creating their own meanings, you develop a different kind of respect for other people's choices. You don't need to agree with their values to appreciate their authenticity in choosing them. You don't need to share their meanings to support their right to create them. This can lead to more genuine tolerance and less judgmental interactions with people who live differently than you do. At the same time, you become more discerning about which communities and relationships you want to invest in. Since you understand that shared values are choices rather than discoveries, you can be more intentional about surrounding yourself with people whose chosen meanings complement and enrich your own. You can build communities based on authentic resonance rather than inherited obligations or social expectations. Tonight, as these ideas drift through your consciousness like clouds across the moon, notice how your relationship to them shifts and changes. Some concepts might feel threatening at first encounter, then gradually reveal themselves as liberating. Others might seem abstract and philosophical, until suddenly they connect with something deeply personal in your experience. This shifting relationship to ideas is itself an example of the nihilistic principle at work. The concepts don't have fixed meanings. They have the meanings you give them, and those meanings can evolve as you do. As we drift further into the heart of nihilistic understanding, we encounter one of its most paradoxical gifts, the discovery that emptiness can be profoundly full, like a bowl that must be hollow to hold water, or silence that makes music possible. The nothingness that nihilism reveals becomes the very space in which authentic living can unfold. This is not the sterile emptiness of a vacuum, but the fertile emptiness of soil before the seed is planted. Think of a master calligrapher approaching a blank sheet of paper. The whiteness is not a problem to be solved, but a possibility to be embraced. Each stroke of ink gains its power not from some predetermined meaning inherent in the paper, but from the deliberate choice of where to place it, how thick to make it, when to pause and when to flow. The beauty emerges from the dance between intention and emptiness, between choice and space. This is how we begin to live once nihilism has done its work of clearing away the inherited assumptions. We approach each day like that blank page, each decision like a brushstroke, each relationship like a line drawn with careful attention and authentic intention. The meaning doesn't exist in the page before we touch it, but it emerges from our engagement with the possibilities that emptiness provides. But let us pause here and acknowledge something that often goes unsaid in philosophical discussions. This journey through nihilistic territory is not always gentle. There are moments of genuine grief as we release beliefs that once provided comfort. There are periods of disorientation as familiar landmarks of meaning fade from view. There are nights when the absence of cosmic purpose feels less like freedom and more like abandonment. These difficult passages are not failures or signs that we've taken a wrong turn. They are natural responses to the magnitude of what we're letting go. Imagine a bird that has lived its entire life in a cage, finally having the door opened. The first glimpse of sky might be overwhelming rather than liberating. The vastness that represents freedom can initially feel like threat rather than opportunity. But given time and gentle encouragement, the bird learns to soar. Similarly, our souls need time to adjust to the vastness that nihilism reveals. We need patience with ourselves as we develop what we might call existential sea legs, the ability to maintain our balance on the shifting deck of a universe that doesn't provide fixed reference points. We need compassion for the parts of ourselves that still long for the certainty we're learning to live without. During these transitional periods, it can be helpful to remember that nihilism is not asking us to become cold or indifferent. It's not suggesting that we should stop caring about anything or anyone. Quite the opposite. By freeing us from the burden of caring about things because we think we should, nihilism liberates us to care about things because we genuinely do. The love becomes more authentic when it's not commanded. The concern becomes more real when it's not obligatory. The joy becomes more vivid when it's not prescribed. Consider how this transformation affects our relationship with moral questions. Traditional frameworks often present ethics as a set of rules handed down from external authorities. Divine commandments, natural laws, social contracts written by others and imposed upon us. Nihilism suggests that morality, like meaning, is something we create rather than something we discover. This doesn't lead to moral chaos, but to moral authenticity. When you realize that your ethical choices are expressions of who you've decided to become rather than obedience to external commands, those choices carry a different weight. You help others not because you're supposed to, but because helping aligns with the person you've chosen to be. You avoid causing harm not because it's forbidden, but because causing harm conflicts with your authentic values. You practice honesty, not because lying is universally wrong, but because honesty feels consistent with your chosen identity. This approach to ethics can feel both more demanding and more sustainable than rule-based systems. More demanding because you can't simply follow predetermined guidelines without thinking. You must constantly choose, evaluate, and take responsibility for the consequences of your moral decisions. More sustainable because the ethical framework emerges from your authentic self, rather than being imposed from outside. You're less likely to rebel against or abandon a moral system that you've created and continually choose to maintain. The nihilistic approach to suffering deserves special attention, because it's here that this philosophy shows its most practical wisdom. Traditional frameworks often struggle with pain, either trying to explain it away or justify it as serving some higher purpose. Nihilism takes a different approach. Suffering doesn't need to be explained or justified. It simply needs to be acknowledged and responded to with whatever wisdom and compassion we can muster. This perspective can be profoundly healing. When you're going through a difficult period, you don't need to waste energy trying to figure out why it's happening or what lesson it's supposed to teach you. You can direct all your resources toward responding to the situation skillfully. When someone you love is in pain, you don't need to explain their suffering or find meaning in it. You can simply be present with them, offering whatever comfort and support feels appropriate. The absence of cosmic justification for suffering doesn't make pain less real or less worthy of attention. If anything, it makes our compassionate responses more precious, because they emerge from our free choice rather than external obligation. The kindness we show to others becomes an expression of our authentic values, rather than obedience to moral commands. The care we provide becomes a gift rather than a duty. This understanding can transform how we approach our own emotional landscapes. Instead of judging our feelings or trying to determine whether they're justified by external circumstances, we can simply acknowledge them as part of our current experience. Sadness doesn't need to be earned to be valid. Joy doesn't need cosmic approval to be celebrated. Anger doesn't need to serve some higher purpose to deserve attention and skillful expression. The nihilistic perspective on personal growth is particularly nuanced. It suggests that self-improvement doesn't need to be driven by the belief that there's some ideal version of yourself that you're supposed to become. Instead, growth can be motivated by curiosity about your own potential, by the pleasure of developing new capacities, by the satisfaction of becoming more skillful at navigating life's complexities. This approach to development can be more sustainable than improvement driven by external standards. When you're trying to become someone else's idea of who you should be, there's often an underlying sense of inadequacy, a feeling that your current self is somehow wrong or insufficient. When you're growing from nihilistic authenticity, you can appreciate who you are now, while remaining curious about who you might become. The growth emerges from self-acceptance rather than self-rejection. The creative implications of nihilistic living continue to unfold as we explore them more deeply. When art doesn't need to serve beauty or truth or social improvement, it becomes pure expression. You can create simply because creating engages something vital in your nature, because the process of bringing something into existence that wasn't there before feels aligned with your authentic self. This freedom can unleash tremendous creative energy precisely because it removes the pressure to create something important or lasting. You can experiment without fear of failure because there's no external standard to fail against. You can play without worrying about whether your play serves some higher purpose. You can make things badly or well, temporarily or permanently, for yourself or for others, all with equal validity because all emerge from your authentic choice to engage with the creative moment. The same principle applies to how we approach learning and intellectual exploration. Knowledge becomes valuable not because it makes us better people or serves some cosmic purpose, but because the process of understanding enriches our experience of being conscious. We can pursue questions because they fascinate us, explore ideas because they stretch our imagination, engage with complexity because doing so exercises capacities we enjoy exercising. This approach to learning can be deeply satisfying because it removes the utilitarian pressure to make everything practical or immediately applicable. You can study ancient languages not because you'll use them professionally, but because the process of understanding how other humans organize their thoughts delights something in your mind. You can explore mathematical concepts not because you'll apply them directly, but because their elegant patterns create a kind of intellectual aesthetic pleasure. The nihilistic understanding of time and mortality offers another layer of wisdom. When you truly accept that your existence is temporary and that the universe will continue long after you're gone, each moment becomes precious not because it serves some eternal purpose, but precisely because it's fleeting. The temporary nature of experience doesn't diminish its value but intensifies it. Think of watching a sunset. The beauty doesn't come from believing that this particular arrangement of light and colour serves some cosmic function. The beauty emerges from the direct experience of witnessing something magnificent that exists for a brief moment and then fades. The impermanence doesn't make the experience less meaningful but more poignant, more worthy of full attention and appreciation. This acceptance of transience can transform how we hold on to things, relationships and experiences. Instead of grasping desperately at what we don't want to lose, we can practice what we might call conscious appreciation. We can be fully present to what's available now while accepting that everything changes, that all experiences have beginnings and endings, that holding on too tightly often prevents us from enjoying what we actually have. The social dimensions of nihilistic living become more apparent as we practice this philosophy in relationship with others. When you understand that everyone is creating their own meanings, you develop a different kind of respect for human diversity. People's choices don't need to make sense to you for them to be valid expressions of authentic selfhood. Their values don't need to align with yours for them to deserve consideration and respect. This perspective can lead to more genuine tolerance and less missionary zeal about converting others to your way of seeing things. You can share your perspectives without needing others to adopt them. You can appreciate different approaches to living without feeling threatened by their existence. You can build communities based on authentic resonance, rather than shared beliefs about objective truth. At the same time, nihilistic understanding can make you more discerning about which relationships and communities you invest your limited time and energy in. Since you understand that all values are chosen rather than discovered, you can be intentional about surrounding yourself with people whose chosen meanings complement and enrich your own experience. You can seek out relationships that feel mutually enhancing, rather than those based solely on proximity or social obligation. The economic and professional implications of nihilistic thinking are worth exploring as well. When work doesn't need to serve some grand purpose or contribute to cosmic progress, you can choose your professional activities based on more personal criteria. Does this work engage your capacities in satisfying ways? Does it provide the resources you need to live according to your chosen values? Does it connect you with people and projects that feel meaningful to you? This approach doesn't necessarily lead to dropping out of conventional economic systems, but it can lead to more authentic participation in them. You can pursue success not because you believe the universe requires it, but because achievement feels consistent with your chosen identity. You can embrace financial security not because wealth is inherently good, but because having resources provides more options for living according to your authentic values. The nihilistic approach to tradition and cultural inheritance is particularly subtle. It doesn't require rejecting everything from the past, but rather approaching inherited wisdom with conscious choice rather than automatic acceptance. You can embrace traditions that resonate with your authentic self, while releasing those that feel imposed or inauthentic. You can appreciate the accumulated wisdom of previous generations while maintaining the freedom to adapt it to your own circumstances. This selective engagement with cultural inheritance can be deeply satisfying. You're not trapped by the limitations of your background, but you're also not required to reject everything that came before you. You can take what serves your authentic development and leave the rest, creating a unique synthesis that reflects your individual journey through the possibilities that life offers. As we near the deeper waters of our nihilistic exploration, we begin to see how this philosophy functions not as an endpoint, but as a clearing, a space that's been prepared for whatever wants to grow there. The nihilistic journey strips away the inherited assumptions and imposed meanings so that something more authentic can emerge. What that something is depends entirely on who you are and who you choose to become. Some people, having cleared this space, choose to build new systems of meaning that feel more personally authentic than what they inherited. Others prefer to live more fluidly, creating temporary meanings for specific situations and relationships without trying to construct comprehensive worldviews. Still others find that the clearing itself becomes their home, that they prefer to live in the spaciousness without filling it with new constructions. All of these approaches are valid because all emerge from the same fundamental recognition that you are free to create your own relationship with existence. The freedom is not comfortable or easy, but it is real. And in that reality lies both tremendous responsibility and tremendous possibility. Tonight, as these ideas settle into your consciousness like sediment in still water, notice how your relationship to your own life might be shifting. Perhaps some choices that once felt obligatory now feel more optional. Perhaps some meanings that once seemed given now reveal themselves as chosen. Perhaps some fears that once felt justified now seem based on assumptions you no longer need to accept. This shifting is natural and healthy. It's the sign that nihilistic understanding is doing its work of creating space for more authentic living. The process is gradual and gentle, like dawn slowly brightening the sky. There's no rush, no pressure to transform everything at once. The clearing happens at its own pace, in its own time, according to its own mysterious logic. And in that clearing, in that space of possibility that nihilism provides, something beautiful begins to emerge. Not the beauty of inherited meaning or imposed purpose, but the beauty of conscious choice, authentic expression, and creative engagement with the mystery of existence. This is where our journey together continues, in the fertile emptiness that makes all growth possible. As we drift deeper into this exploration, we encounter what might be called the nihilistic awakening. It's that moment when the fog of inherited assumptions finally lifts, and you see the landscape of existence with startling clarity. The trees are still trees, the mountains still mountains, but now you understand that the meanings you once attributed to them were projections of your own consciousness rather than the inherent properties of the world itself. This awakening often comes quietly, like the gradual recognition of dawn after a long night. You might be sitting in a coffee shop, watching people hurry past the window, when suddenly you realize that each of these individuals is carrying their own constructed universe of meanings. The businessman rushing to his meeting isn't late because lateness is cosmically significant, but because he's chosen to participate in a social system that treats punctuality as important. The artist sketching in the corner isn't creating because beauty is an objective truth, but because the act of creating resonates with something authentic in their nature. This recognition can be simultaneously liberating and vertigo-inducing. It's like discovering that the floor you've been standing on was actually a stage, and the walls around you are painted backdrops rather than permanent architecture. The revelation doesn't make the stage less real or useful, but it does reveal that you've been participating in a kind of theatre all along. The nihilistic awakening often brings with it a peculiar form of compassion. When you understand that everyone is improvising their way through existence, creating meanings on the fly and hoping they'll hold together long enough to provide some guidance, you develop a gentler attitude toward human folly and contradiction. The person who seems rigidly attached to their beliefs isn't necessarily being stubborn. They might be clinging to the only source of orientation they've managed to construct in a universe that offers no natural to your navigation system. This compassion extends past self as well. The meanings you once found compelling, the purposes that once drove you forward, the beliefs that once provided comfort, none of these were mistakes or failures. They were attempts to create livable frameworks for existence, and they served their purpose for as long as they remained useful. The fact that you've outgrown them doesn't invalidate their former importance in your life. Consider how this perspective transforms regret and self-judgment. When you understand that all meanings are constructed rather than discovered, your past choices stop seeming like right or wrong answers to some cosmic test. They become experiments in living, attempts to navigate existence with whatever tools and understanding you had available at the time. Some experiments worked better than others, but all provided information about who you are and how you want to engage with life. This experimental approach to existence becomes one of nihilism's most practical gifts. Instead of agonizing over whether you're making the right choices according to some external standard, you can approach decisions as opportunities to gather information about what kinds of experiences and outcomes feel meaningful to you. The choice doesn't need to be perfect or permanent. It just needs to be consciously made and attentively observed. Think of a scientist running experiments in a laboratory. Each trial provides data, regardless of whether the results match the hypothesis. Failed experiments are often more informative than successful ones because they reveal assumptions that need to be questioned or variables that weren't properly accounted for. Similarly, choices that don't lead to the outcomes you expected can provide valuable information about your authentic preferences and the complex systems you're trying to navigate. This experimental mindset can transform how you approach major life transitions. Career changes, relationship decisions, geographic moves, all of these can be approached as experiments rather than permanent commitments to predetermined paths can make. Your choice. Engage with it fully and gather information about how it feels to live with the consequences. If the experiment reveals that you've moved in a direction that doesn't serve your authentic development, you can adjust course without feeling like you've failed some cosmic purpose. The nihilistic approach to identity is particularly fascinating. Traditional frameworks often suggest that you have some essential self that you need to discover and then remain true to throughout your life. Nihilism suggests something different, that the self is more like a story you tell about yourself, a narrative that you can consciously craft and revise as you gain new experiences and insights. This doesn't mean that identity becomes arbitrary or that personal growth becomes impossible. Rather, it means that you become the author of your own character development. Instead of trying to discover some predetermined plot, you can choose which aspects of your personality to cultivate, which values to emphasize, which capacities to develop. The choices aren't validated by external authorities, but they become expressions of your authentic preferences and aspirations. This authorial relationship to selfhood can be deeply empowering. Instead of feeling trapped by your past or limited by your current circumstances, you can view yourself as a work in progress, a character whose story is still being written. The chapters you've already written inform the current chapter, but they don't determine it. You can choose to emphasize certain themes, develop new plot lines, or even shift genres entirely if that serves your authentic development. The social implications of this approach to identity are profound. When you understand that everyone is authoring their own story, you develop a different kind of respect for the diversity of human narratives. People aren't right or wrong about who they are. They're creative beings engaged in the ongoing project of constructing meaningful identities from the raw materials of consciousness and experience. This perspective can lead to more authentic relationships because it removes the pressure to find people who share your essential nature or fundamental beliefs. Instead, you can connect with people based on the stories they're choosing to tell about themselves and the ways those stories complement or enrich your own narrative. Relationships become collaborations in meaning-making, rather than discoveries of predetermined compatibility. The nihilistic understanding of love deserves special attention because it transforms one of the most significant areas of human experience. Traditional frameworks often present love as something that happens to us, a force that strikes like lightning, or a recognition of some cosmic connection between souls. Nihilism suggests that love is something we create and choose to maintain. our ongoing decision to value and care for another person's well-being and development. This shift from love as discovery to love as creation doesn't make romantic relationships less meaningful. If anything, it makes them more precious, because the love becomes an expression of conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. You love your partner not because fate has decreed it, or because they complete some missing part of your essential nature, but because you've chosen to find their well-being important to your own sense of meaning and fulfillment. This chosen quality of love can make relationships more resilient because it's based on conscious decision-making, rather than feeling states that fluctuate with circumstances. When love is understood as something you create rather than something that happens to you, you can maintain it through difficult periods by continuing to choose it, even when the emotional experience of loving feels challenging or absent. The nihilistic approach to parenting and family relationships is equally transformative. Instead of raising children according to predetermined ideas about what they should become, you can focus on helping them develop their own capacity for conscious choice and authentic self-expression. The goal becomes not to shape them into specific outcomes, but to provide them with the tools and experiences they need to author their own meaningful lives. This approach can reduce the anxiety and guilt that often accompany parenting in cultures with rigid expectations about child development and achievement. When you understand that there's no single right way to live a human life, you can focus on supporting your children's authentic development, rather than pushing them toward predetermined definitions of success or happiness. The nihilistic understanding of death and mortality offers perhaps its most profound wisdom. When you truly accept that consciousness is temporary, and that the universe will continue long after your individual awareness has ceased, each moment of experience becomes infinitely precious, not because it serves some eternal purpose, but precisely because it won't last forever. This acceptance of mortality can transform how you prioritize your time and attention. Instead of deferring happiness until you've achieved certain goals or accumulated specific experiences, you can appreciate the richness of present moment awareness. Instead of treating current relationships as stepping stones to better ones, you can fully engage with the people who are actually in your life right now. Instead of waiting for ideal conditions to begin living authentically, you can start making choices that reflect your genuine values and preferences immediately. The temporary nature of existence doesn't make it meaningless, but rather makes every moment of consciousness a small miracle. Think of a shooting star streaking across the night sky. Its beauty doesn't come from lasting forever, but from the brief, brilliant intensity of its passage. Similarly, human consciousness is beautiful, not because it's permanent, but because it provides a brief window through which the universe can experience itself subjectively. This perspective on mortality can also transform how you approach legacy and the desire to leave something lasting behind. Instead of focusing on creating permanent monuments to your existence, you can concentrate on the immediate impact of your choices on the people and situations you encounter. The kindness you show to a stranger, the beauty you create in a moment, the understanding you bring to a difficult conversation. These may not last forever, but they ripple through the immediate present in ways that enrich the ongoing human experience. The nihilistic approach to work and professional life offers practical wisdom for navigating economic systems without losing your authentic center. When you understand that careers don't need to serve cosmic purposes or contribute to predetermined notions of progress, you can choose your professional activities based on how well they align with your chosen values and support your authentic development. This doesn't necessarily mean abandoning conventional career paths, but it does mean approaching them more consciously. You can pursue professional success because achievement feels consistent with your chosen identity, not because you believe the universe requires you to be successful. You can engage with economic systems because they provide resources for living according to your authentic values, not because wealth accumulation is inherently meaningful. The nihilistic understanding can also help you maintain perspective during professional challenges and setbacks. When work problems don't represent cosmic failures, but simply information about the complex systems you're trying to navigate, you can respond to them more strategically and less emotionally. You can make career changes based on what serves your authentic development, rather than what you think you should want or what others expect from you. As we move deeper into nihilistic territory, we encounter what might be called the paradox of engaged meaninglessness. The more fully you accept that existence has no inherent purpose, the more free you become to engage passionately with the purposes you create. The recognition that nothing matters in any ultimate sense can lead to caring more deeply about the things you choose to matter to you. This paradox reveals itself in countless ways throughout daily life. The conversation with a friend becomes more precious when you understand that the universe doesn't require you to have friendships, that you're choosing to value this connection because it enriches your experience in ways you find meaningful. The work you do becomes more engaging when you recognize that you're not fulfilling some cosmic destiny, but rather expressing your authentic preferences for how to spend your limited time and attention. The artistic expression becomes more vivid when you realize that beauty doesn't exist independently in the world, but emerges from your conscious appreciation of certain patterns, colors, sounds, or ideas. You're not discovering beauty so much as creating it through the act of attention and appreciation. This makes your aesthetic experiences more personal and more immediate, less mediated by abstract theories about what should be considered beautiful. The nihilistic journey often leads to what we might call existential minimalism. Just as material minimalism involves removing unnecessary possessions to focus on what truly serves your life, existential minimalism involves removing unnecessary beliefs, obligations, and inherited meanings to focus on what truly serves your authentic development. You begin to distinguish between meanings you've chosen and meanings that were imposed upon you, keeping the former and releasing the latter. This process of existential decluttering can be deeply satisfying. It's like cleaning out a closet full of clothes that no longer fit or suit your current style. Some items you'll discard without a second thought. Others you'll hold on to for sentimental reasons, even though you rarely wear them. Still others you'll discover you genuinely love and want to keep wearing. The process helps you clarify what actually belongs in your life versus what you've been carrying out of habit or social expectation. The practice of existential minimalism extends to relationships, activities, beliefs, and even personality traits. You can consciously choose which aspects of your inherited identity to maintain and which to release. You can decide which social obligations feel authentic and which feel imposed. You can determine which activities genuinely engage your interest and which you've been pursuing because you thought you should find them meaningful. This selective approach to meaning-making can lead to a life that feels more coherent and authentic because all the elements have been consciously chosen rather than unconsciously inherited. It's like the difference between a house furnished with random items accumulated over time and a house where every piece has been deliberately selected to create a specific atmosphere and serve particular functions. The community-building implications of nihilistic understanding are particularly rich. When you recognize that all values are chosen rather than discovered, you can intentionally seek out people whose chosen values complement your own. You can build relationships and communities based on authentic resonance rather than shared beliefs about objective truth or inherited obligations. This can lead to deeper and more satisfying connections because they're based on genuine appreciation for each other's chosen approaches to living, rather than superficial similarities or social convenience. You can appreciate the diversity of ways people choose to create meaning while still maintaining preferences about which approaches feel most compatible with your own development. The nihilistic perspective can also enhance your capacity for genuine dialogue with people who hold very different views. When you understand that their beliefs are constructions rather than discoveries, you can engage with them more curiously and less defensively. You don't need to convert them to your way of seeing to have a meaningful conversation. You can explore the differences in your constructed meanings without feeling threatened by perspectives that don't align with your own. As we drift further into these contemplations, notice how your relationship to your own thoughts and beliefs might be shifting. Perhaps some convictions that once felt absolute now reveal themselves as preferences. Perhaps some anxieties that once seemed justified now appear to be based on assumptions you no longer need to accept. Perhaps some possibilities that once seemed impossible now feel accessible because they don't require cosmic permission, only personal choice. This gentle transformation of perspective is one of nihilism's most valuable offerings. It doesn't demand dramatic changes or sudden revelations. It simply invites you to notice the difference between what you've inherited and what you've chosen, between what feels imposed and what feels authentic, between what serves your genuine development and what serves external expectations. The process is like learning to distinguish between different tastes in your mouth. At first, everything might seem to blend together into a general sense of flavour, but with practice and attention, you begin to notice subtle differences. This herb versus that spice, the sweetness of fruit versus the sweetness of processed sugar, your natural preferences versus acquired tastes that never quite felt right. Similarly, with existential attention, you begin to distinguish between meanings that resonate authentically with who you are and meanings that you've accepted because they were presented as universal truths. Some inherited meanings you'll discover you genuinely want to keep. Others you'll realise never quite fit, but you carried them anyway out of habit or social pressure. The night deepens around us as we explore these subtle territories of consciousness and choice. In the quiet darkness, away from the noise of external authorities and social expectations, we can hear more clearly the whispers of our authentic preferences. We can sense more accurately which directions feel like genuine paths forward, and which feel like detours imposed by others' ideas about who we should be or what we should value. This is the space that nihilism creates. A quiet clearing in the forest of inherited meanings, a place where you can rest and listen to your own inner compass without the interference of external magnetic fields, is not an empty space but a spacious one, not a void but a field of possibilities waiting for your conscious cultivation. Tonight, as these ideas settle into the deeper layers of your awareness, let them work their gentle magic of clarification and liberation. You don't need to grasp them or figure them out completely. You can simply let them drift through your consciousness like leaves floating down a quiet stream, each one carrying its own subtle gift of perspective and possibility. The nihilistic understanding doesn't ask you to become someone different overnight. It simply invites you to become more consciously yourself, more deliberately engaged with the choices that shape your daily experience, more authentically responsive to the endless opportunities for meaning creation that every moment provides. And in that gentle invitation lies the true gift of this philosophy. Not the destruction of meaning, but the recognition that you are meaning's author. Not the elimination of purpose, but the discovery that purpose is something you create rather than something you find. In the beautiful darkness of nihilistic understanding, you become free to write your own story of what it means to be consciously alive in an endlessly mysterious universe. As we settle deeper into this philosophical embrace, let us explore how nihilism transforms our relationship with time itself. Not clock time or calendar time, but lived time, the quality of moments as they unfold in consciousness. When you release the belief that time must be productive or purposeful in some cosmic sense, each moment becomes available for pure experience rather than anxious achievement. Think of a cat lying in a patch of sunlight, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of warmth on fur. The cat isn't worried about whether this moment serves some greater purpose or contributes to personal growth. It's simply present to the experience of being warm and comfortable. This quality of presence becomes available to us when we stop demanding that every moment justify itself according to external standards. The nihilistic understanding of time can be profoundly restful. You don't need to optimize every hour or extract maximum value from each experience. You can simply inhabit moments as they arise, appreciating them for their immediate qualities rather than their contribution to some larger project. A conversation can be valuable simply because it's happening, not because it advances your goals or serves your development. This shift in temporal perspective can transform how you experience what we usually call boredom. When moments don't need to be filled with significance or productivity, empty time becomes spacious rather than problematic. You can sit quietly without feeling like you should be accomplishing something. You can let your mind wander without judging the wandering as wasteful. You can simply exist without needing that existence to be remarkable or meaningful in any objective sense. The practice of what we might call nihilistic presence involves releasing the constant mental commentary that tries to evaluate and categorize every experience. Instead of thinking about whether this moment is good or bad, productive or wasteful, meaningful or trivial, You can simply notice what's actually happening in your direct experience. The warmth of your breath, the texture of your thoughts, the subtle shifts in your emotional landscape. This quality of attention doesn't require belief in mindfulness as a spiritual practice or meditation as a path to enlightenment. It simply involves choosing to be present to immediate experience, because presence feels more authentic than the constant mental storytelling about what everything means or where it's leading. The attention becomes an end in itself rather than a means to some other goal. Consider how this might transform your relationship with routine activities. Washing dishes doesn't need to be a mindfulness practice or a form of service to your household. It can simply be the experience of warm water and soap bubbles, the satisfaction of returning order to chaos, the quiet rhythm of a familiar task. The activity gains meaning from your engagement with it, rather than from any external purpose it serves. Similarly, walking becomes valuable not because it's exercise or because it gets you somewhere, but because of the immediate experience of movement through space. The feeling of your feet connecting with the ground, the subtle changes in scenery, the rhythm of breath and step. These experiences don't need justification or improvement. They can simply be appreciated for what they are in this moment. The nihilistic approach to physical existence is particularly gentle. Your body doesn't need to be optimized or perfected according to external standards. It can simply be inhabited with appreciation and care because it's the vehicle through which you experience consciousness. Health becomes valuable not because fitness is inherently good, but because feeling well in your body enhances your capacity to engage authentically with immediate experience. This perspective can reduce the anxiety and self-judgment that often accompanies bodily changes and aging. Your body doesn't need to conform to social ideals or maintain youthful appearance to be worthy of care and appreciation. It can simply be accepted as the temporary changing form that consciousness currently inhabits. The changes become part of the experience rather than problems to be solved or failures to be hidden. The same gentle acceptance can extend to your emotional landscape. Feelings don't need to be justified or improved or eliminated. They can simply be acknowledged as part of your current experience. Sadness doesn't need to teach you lessons or serve your growth to be valid. It can simply be sadness, felt fully, and allowed to move through your awareness like weather passing through the sky. Similarly, joy doesn't need to be earned or deserve to be celebrated when. It can simply be appreciated arises, without the pressure to make it permanent or to understand why you're experiencing it. The emotion becomes valuable in itself rather than as a sign of spiritual progress or personal achievement. This acceptance can make the full range of human feeling more available because you're not constantly evaluating whether your emotions are appropriate or beneficial. The nihilistic understanding can transform how you approach creativity and self-expression. Art doesn't need to communicate important messages or serve social functions to be worth creating. You can make things simply because the process of creation engages something vital in your nature. The painting doesn't need to be beautiful. The poem doesn't need to be profound. The song doesn't need to move others. They can simply be expressions of your current relationship with existence. This freedom from external validation can unleash tremendous creative energy because it removes the fear of creating something inadequate or meaningless. When the creation doesn't need to achieve anything beyond its own existence, you can experiment more boldly, play more freely, express more authentically. The creative act becomes valuable for its own sake, rather than for the products it generates. The approach extends to how you engage with learning and intellectual curiosity. Knowledge doesn't need to make you a better person, or prepare you for future challenges to be worth pursuing. You can explore ideas simply because exploration satisfies something in your nature. The understanding doesn't need to be practical or applicable. It can simply be interesting in this moment, engaging to consider, satisfying to contemplate. This can make learning more joyful because it removes the utilitarian pressure to justify every intellectual interest. You can study astronomy not because it will improve your life, but because contemplating the vastness of space creates a particular quality of wonder in your consciousness. You can read poetry not because it will make you more cultured, but because the play of language produces experiences you can't find elsewhere. The nihilistic perspective on relationships continues to reveal new dimensions as we explore it more deeply. When connections don't need to serve predetermined purposes or fulfill cosmic functions, they become pure expressions of appreciation and choice. You can enjoy someone's company simply because their presence enhances your immediate experience. The relationship doesn't need to last forever, or teach you important lessons to be valuable right now. This can make relationships more relaxed and authentic because it removes the pressure to extract maximum meaning or growth from every interaction. You can have conversations that go nowhere in particular, spend time together without accomplishing anything specific, enjoy each other's presence without needing the connection to develop in predetermined directions. The relationship becomes valuable for its own sake, rather than as a means to other ends. The understanding also transforms how you approach conflict and disagreement. When you recognize that everyone is creating their own meanings rather than discovering objective truths, differences of opinion become less threatening and more interesting. You don't need to convert others to your perspective or defend your views against all challenges. You can engage with different viewpoints curiously, appreciating the creativity involved in constructing alternative approaches to meaning-making. This can lead to more genuine dialogue because you're not trying to win arguments or prove points, but rather exploring the different ways consciousness can organize itself around experience. The conversation becomes an end in itself rather than a means to establishing who's right about disputed questions. This shift can make disagreements less personal and more philosophical, less threatening, and more enriching. The nihilistic approach to tradition and cultural inheritance continues to offer subtle wisdom. You can appreciate the accumulated insights of previous generations without feeling obligated to accept them wholesale. Each tradition becomes a resource to draw from rather than an authority to obey. You can take what serves your authentic development and leave what feels imposed or outdated. This selective engagement with cultural wisdom can be deeply satisfying because it allows you to honour the past while remaining free to adapt its insights to your current circumstances. You can practice ancient rituals not because they're universally meaningful, but because they resonate with your chosen approach to living. You can study historical philosophies not because they contain eternal truths, but because they offer perspectives that enrich your own thinking. The process becomes like visiting a vast library where you can browse freely, reading what captures your interest and leaving what doesn't resonate. You're not required to read everything, or to accept what you read as authoritative. You can simply appreciate the diversity of human attempts to make sense of existence while maintaining the freedom to create your own synthesis. As we drift deeper into these contemplations, the boundaries between philosophy and poetry begin to blur. Nihilistic understanding doesn't present itself as a system of logical propositions, but as a way of inhabiting existence with greater authenticity and less anxiety. It's more like learning to dance than learning to solve equations. The movement matters more than the destination, the quality of engagement more than the outcomes achieved. This poetic quality of nihilistic living can make ordinary experiences more vivid and immediate. When moments don't need to be categorized or understood or improved, they can do of attention usually do with the kin simply be experience reserved for art or natural beauty. The taste of water becomes noteworthy. The play of light through windows becomes fascinating. The rhythm of your own breathing becomes a source of quiet pleasure. The understanding transforms not just what you think about existence, but how you inhabit it. Life becomes less like a problem to be solved and more like a medium to be explored. Consciousness becomes less like a tool for achieving goals and more like a capacity for appreciating the endless subtlety and richness of immediate experience. This shift can make you feel more at home in your own skin, more comfortable with the fundamental uncertainty that characterizes human existence. When you stop expecting life to provide clear answers or reliable guidance, you can relax into the ongoing process of navigating without fixed reference points. The uncertainty becomes part of the adventure rather than a problem to be overcome. The nihilistic journey often leads to what we might call existential lightness. Not the lightness of frivolity or superficiality, but the lightness that comes from releasing unnecessary burdens. When you stop carrying the weight of cosmic responsibility, when you release the pressure to discover predetermined purposes, When you abandon the project of justifying your existence to imaginary authorities, a natural buoyancy emerges. This lightness doesn't make you less caring or less engaged with life. If anything, it can make your involvement more authentic because it's chosen rather than compelled. You can care deeply about things without needing that caring to be cosmically validated. You can engage passionately with projects without requiring them to serve eternal purposes. You can love intensely without demanding that the love be written in the stars. The quality of lightness can transform how you carry yourself through daily life. Challenges become less overwhelming when they don't represent cosmic tests of your worth. Failures become less devastating when they don't threaten your fundamental identity. Successes become more enjoyable when they don't need to prove anything beyond their immediate satisfaction. This emotional resilience emerges not from building stronger defenses, but from releasing the beliefs that made defense necessary in the first place. When your worth doesn't depend on external validation, criticism becomes information rather than attack. When your identity doesn't require constant reinforcement, uncertainty becomes space for discovery rather than threat to stability. The practice of nihilistic living can be seen as a form of existential aikido, using the energy of uncertainty and meaninglessness to create greater freedom and authenticity rather than fighting against these conditions. Instead of resisting the absence of inherent purpose, you learn to move with it, finding your balance within the flow of constant change rather than seeking solid ground that doesn't exist. This fluid approach to existence can make you more adaptable and responsive to changing circumstances. When your meanings are consciously chosen, rather than rigidly inherited, you can revise them as new information and experiences become available. When your identity is understood as a story you're writing rather than a truth you're discovering, you can edit the narrative as you learn and grow. The adaptability extends to how you approach planning and goal setting. You can make plans and work toward outcomes without being attached to specific results. The planning becomes a way of organizing your attention and energy in the present rather than a contract with the future. The goals become directions to move in rather than destinations you must reach to validate your choices. This approach can reduce the anxiety that often accompanies long-term planning in an uncertain world. When plans don't need to succeed according to predetermined criteria, they become experiments in possibility rather than investments that must pay off. You can pursue directions that feel meaningful to you without requiring guarantees about where they'll lead, or whether they'll produce the outcomes you initially imagined. As we continue our gentle exploration, notice how these ideas might be creating space in your own consciousness. Space between you and your automatic reactions. Space between you and your inherited beliefs. Space between you and the constant pressure to justify your existence according to external standards. This space is not emptiness but availability, not absence but presence, not void but possibility. In this spaciousness, you can begin to sense what it might feel like to live more authentically, to choose your meanings more consciously, to engage with existence more directly. The sensing doesn't require dramatic changes or immediate transformations. It can simply be an awareness of different possibilities, a recognition that other ways of being are available when you choose to, if and explore them. The nihilistic understanding offers itself not as another belief system to adopt, but as a clearing process, a way of removing obstacles to more authentic living. It doesn't tell you what to believe or how to live, but rather helps you distinguish between what you've chosen and what's been imposed, between what serves your genuine development and what serves external expectations. Tonight, as these contemplations settle into the deeper layers of your awareness, let them work their gentle alchemy of clarification and liberation. You don't need to understand everything or figure out how to apply these insights immediately. You can simply let them permeate your consciousness like rain soaking into earth, nourishing possibilities that may not emerge until much later. The transformation that nihilistic understanding offers is both profound and subtle. It doesn't necessarily change what you do, but can transform why you do it and how you experience the doing. The same activities that once felt burdensome because they were obligatory can become satisfying when they're chosen. The same relationships that once felt constraining because they were based on external expectations can become nourishing when they're consciously maintained. In the quiet darkness of contemplation, away from the noise of social demands and inherited meanings, you can begin to sense your authentic preferences more clearly. Not what you should want or what others expect you to value, but what actually resonates with the deepest layers of your being. This sensing is subtle and requires patience, like listening for a quiet melody beneath the surface of louder sounds. The melody of authentic selfhood doesn't announce itself dramatically. It whispers in moments of stillness, reveals itself in spontaneous preferences, emerges in the choices you make when no one is watching and nothing external is at stake. Nihilistic understanding creates the conditions for hearing this quiet music more clearly by reducing the volume of external authorities and inherited expectations. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let yourself rest in the spaciousness that these ideas have opened. There's nothing you need to figure out or resolve, no decisions you need to make or positions you need to take. You can simply exist in the gentle awareness that existence itself is enough, that consciousness itself is remarkable, that being authentically yourself in each moment is the only responsibility that truly belongs to you. The universe doesn't require your justification or explanation. Your life doesn't need cosmic approval to be valid and valuable. Your choices don't need external validation to be meaningful expressions of who you are and who you're becoming. In this recognition lies both tremendous freedom and profound peace, the peace of finally coming home to yourself in a world that never demanded you be anyone else. In the deepest part of our journey tonight, we encounter what might be the most paradoxical aspect of nihilistic understanding: the discovery that emptiness can be the most fertile ground for joy. Not the manufactured happiness that comes from achieving external goals, but the spontaneous joy that emerges when consciousness recognizes its own freedom to appreciate whatever is actually present in this moment. Think of a child discovering snow for the first time, reaching out to catch flakes on their tongue with pure delight. The child isn't analysing the meteorological conditions or considering the practical implications of winter weather. They're simply present to the immediate magic of frozen water crystals dissolving on their tongue. This quality of unmediated appreciation becomes available to us when we stop requiring experiences to justify themselves according to predetermined frameworks of significance. The nihilistic appreciation of beauty operates on similar principles. A sunset doesn't need to symbolize hope or represent divine artistry to move you to tears. The colors themselves, the way light refracts through atmospheric particles, the simple fact that your consciousness is positioned to witness this particular arrangement of photons at this particular moment, all of this can be overwhelming in its immediate presence without requiring any deeper meaning or cosmic purpose. This direct engagement with aesthetic experience can transform how you move through the world. Architecture becomes fascinating not because it represents cultural values, but because of the way space is carved and light is channeled. Music becomes captivating not because it expresses universal emotions, but because of how certain frequencies interact with your nervous system in ways that feel pleasant or intriguing. Poetry becomes moving not because it contains profound truths, but because language can be arranged to create experiences that exist nowhere else. The nihilistic approach to wonder and curiosity reveals itself as particularly rich. Questions become valuable not because they lead to important answers, but because the process of questioning engages your consciousness in satisfying ways. You can explore ideas simply because exploration feels aligned with something essential in your nature. The mystery deepens rather than resolves, but the deepening itself becomes a source of ongoing fascination. Consider how this transforms your relationship with uncertainty and the unknown. Instead of seeing mystery as a problem to be solved or ignorance as a deficiency to be corrected, you can appreciate not knowing as a space of ongoing possibility. The questions you can't answer become invitations for continued exploration, rather than sources of anxiety or intellectual inadequacy. Your consciousness gets to remain curious and open rather than closed and defensive. This comfort with uncertainty can extend to how you navigate major life transitions and decisions. When outcomes don't need to conform to predetermined plans, you can approach changes with greater equanimity and interest. Career shifts become experiments in different ways of spending your time and attention, rather than tests of your ability to choose correctly. relationship changes become opportunities to explore different modes of connection rather than evidence of success or failure in love. The practice of what we might call nihilistic gratitude emerges naturally from this understanding. You can appreciate experiences not because you believe gratitude is a virtue, or because thankfulness serves your personal development, but simply because appreciation feels like a natural response to consciousness, encountering something it finds valuable. The gratitude doesn't require an object to be grateful to, or a reason why you should feel thankful. It can simply be the spontaneous recognition that something in your experience feels precious. This appreciation can extend to the most ordinary aspects of daily existence. The fact that your body maintains its temperature automatically while you sleep. The way your mind can hold abstract concepts and manipulate them into new configurations. The reality that other conscious beings exist, and that you can sometimes sense what their experience might be like. None of these phenomena need cosmic justification to evoke genuine appreciation for the improbable complexity and beauty of existence. The nihilistic understanding of solitude offers another dimension of wisdom. Time alone doesn't need to be productive or restorative or spiritually significant to be valuable. You can simply enjoy your own company because consciousness appreciating itself is intrinsically satisfying. The quiet moments don't need to provide insights or revelations. They can simply be quiet, spacious, available for whatever wants to emerge or remain empty. This comfortable relationship with solitude can reduce the compulsive quality that often characterizes social engagement. You can spend time with others because their company enhances your experience, not because you need external stimulation to avoid confronting inner emptiness. The choice to be social or solitary becomes more authentic when both options feel equally valid and available. The understanding extends to how you approach rest and leisure. Activities don't need to serve your growth or provide specific benefits to be worth engaging with. You can read novels not because literature improves your mind, but because stories create experiences you find engaging. You can listen to music not because it enhances your mood, but because certain sounds interact with your consciousness in ways you appreciate. You can take walks not because exercise is healthy, but because moving through space feels satisfying. This release from utilitarian thinking can make leisure more genuinely restful. When relaxation doesn't need to prepare you for future productivity, it can be complete in itself. When entertainment doesn't need to educate or inspire, it can simply entertain. When pleasure doesn't need justification, it can be received with uncomplicated appreciation. The nihilistic approach to aging and the passage of time reveals its gentleness as we explore it more deeply. Changes in your body and mind don't need to be resisted or welcomed, according to cultural narratives about what aging should mean. They can simply be noticed and adapted to as part of the ongoing experience of inhabiting a temporary physical form. The changes become information about your current capacities, rather than judgments about your worth or indicators of life's meaning. This acceptance can reduce the anxiety that often accompanies awareness of mortality. When death doesn't represent failure or loss of cosmic purpose, it becomes simply the natural conclusion of a temporary arrangement of consciousness and matter. The finitude doesn't make life meaningless, but rather makes each moment of awareness more remarkable for its improbable existence. The understanding can transform how you hold memories and anticipations. Past experiences don't need to be preserved as monuments to your identity or lessons for future guidance. They can simply be appreciated as part of the rich texture of consciousness that has unfolded through your particular nervous system. Similarly, future possibilities don't need to be planned toward or worried about as destinations that will validate your choices. They can remain open, undefined, available for whatever emerges from the intersection of your choices with circumstances you can't predict or control. This temporal lightness can make you more present to immediate experience because less of your attention is bound up in maintaining narratives about past significance or future importance. The current moment becomes more vivid when it doesn't need to connect to elaborate stories about where you've been or where you're going. It can simply be this moment, arising and passing away like everything else in the flow of experience. The nihilistic understanding of communication and expression continues to offer subtle insights. Words don't need to convey objective truths or achieve specific effects on others to be worth speaking. You can share your thoughts and feelings simply because expression feels like a natural function of consciousness engaging with its own contents. The communication doesn't need to be understood perfectly or received enthusiastically. It can simply be offered as one conscious being's attempt to share something of their inner experience with another. This can make conversations more relaxed and authentic because they're not burdened with the pressure to accomplish predetermined goals. You can speak truthfully without needing others to accept your truth. You can listen carefully without feeling obligated to agree or provide solutions. The exchange becomes valuable for its own sake rather than as a means to other ends. The understanding extends to how you approach teaching and learning from others. Knowledge doesn't need to be transmitted perfectly or received completely to be worthwhile sharing. You can offer what you've learned without attachment to whether others find it useful. You can receive others' insights without feeling obligated to apply them or integrate them into your existing worldview. The exchange of perspectives becomes a form of play rather than work, exploration rather than instruction. As we drift deeper into these contemplations, we begin to sense how nihilistic understanding might transform the very quality of attention itself. Awareness doesn't need to be focused or unfocused, concentrated or relaxed according to external standards of proper mental states. It can simply be whatever it is in this moment, appreciated for its current quality rather than evaluated according to idealized conditions. This natural awareness can be more sustainable than practices that require constant effort to maintain specific states of consciousness. You don't need to meditate or practice mindfulness to be present. You can simply notice what's already happening in your immediate experience without trying to change or improve it. The attention becomes effortless because it's not trying to achieve anything beyond its own natural functioning. The quality of effortless attention can extend to how you engage with thoughts and emotions as they arise. Mental contents don't need to be managed or transformed or transcended. They can simply be acknowledged as part of the current weather pattern in consciousness. Thoughts can think themselves, feelings can feel themselves, and you can remain present to the ongoing process without needing to intervene or direct the flow. This receptive stance toward inner experience can reduce the internal conflict that often characterizes attempts at self-improvement or spiritual development. When consciousness doesn't need to be purified or perfected, it can relax into its natural functioning. When thoughts don't need to be controlled or eliminated, they can arise and pass away without creating problems that require solutions. The nihilistic approach to wonder and awe reveals new depths as we continue exploring. The capacity for amazement doesn't need to be cultivated or maintained as a spiritual practice. It can simply be allowed to emerge naturally when consciousness encounters something that exceeds its usual categories and expectations. The wonder becomes spontaneous rather than effortful, a natural response to the inexhaustible mystery of existence rather than a technique for enhancing appreciation. This spontaneous wonder can transform how you encounter both familiar and unfamiliar experiences. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, not through mental effort, but through simple attention to what's actually present. The familiar reveals hidden dimensions when you're not taking it for granted according to habitual patterns of perception. The unfamiliar becomes approachable rather than threatening when it doesn't need to be immediately understood or categorized. The understanding can make you more available to surprise and serendipity in daily life. When experiences don't need to conform to expectations or serve predetermined purposes, you become more receptive to whatever actually emerges. Plans become loose frameworks rather than rigid requirements. Outcomes become information rather than success or failure. The unexpected becomes welcome rather than problematic. This openness to surprise can make life feel more alive and engaging, because you're not constantly filtering experience through narrow expectations about what should happen or how things should unfold rather than ailed. Reality gets to be itself disappointing approximation of your preferences. Consciousness gets to encounter what's actually present rather than what it thinks should be present. The nihilistic understanding of generosity and service offers particular gentle wisdom. Acts of kindness don't need to be motivated by moral obligations or spiritual practices to be genuine expressions of care. You can help others simply because their well-being feels connected to your own sense of what makes life worth living. The service doesn't need to change the world or earn cosmic rewards. It can simply be one conscious being responding to another with whatever compassion and assistance feels authentic in the moment. This natural generosity can be more sustainable than helping driven by guilt or duty because it emerges from genuine appreciation rather than external pressure. You can give what you have available without depleting yourself trying to meet impossible standards of universal compassion. You can receive help from others without feeling indebted or inadequate. The exchange becomes part of the natural flow of resources and care that sustains conscious life. The practice extends to how you treat yourself with kindness and patience. Self-care doesn't need to be justified as necessary for serving others or maintaining productivity. You can tend to your own needs simply because consciousness deserves gentle treatment regardless of what it accomplishes or contributes. The care becomes an end in itself rather than a means to other goals. This self-compassion can reduce the internal harshness that often characterizes attempts at personal improvement. When you don't need to become a better person according to external standards, you can work with your current capacities and limitations more skillfully. Growth becomes organic rather than forced, emerging from authentic interest rather than self-criticism or inadequacy. Tonight, as these explorations settle into the quiet depths of your awareness, notice how they might be creating a different relationship with existence itself. Perhaps life feels less like a test you might fail, and more like an experience you're having. Perhaps consciousness feels less like a tool for achieving goals, and more like a capacity for appreciating whatever is actually present. Perhaps being human feels less like a problem to be solved, and more like a temporary adventure in awareness. This shift in fundamental orientation doesn't require dramatic changes in your external circumstances. The same activities can continue, the same relationships can be maintained, the same responsibilities can be met. But the quality of engagement might transform subtly, becoming more chosen and less compulsive, more present and less anxious, more appreciative and less demanding. The transformation happens gradually, like dawn slowly brightening the sky. You might not notice the changes as they occur, but over time you may sense that something has shifted in how you hold your existence. The weight of cosmic responsibility lightens, the pressure to justify your choices decreases, the freedom to be authentically yourself in each moment increases. In this gentle transformation lies perhaps the most profound gift of nihilistic understanding. Not the destruction of meaning, but the recognition that meaning is something you create. Not the elimination of purpose, but the discovery that purpose is something you choose. Not the end of significance, but the beginning of conscious significance making. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let yourself rest in this recognition. Your existence doesn't require justification or explanation. Your consciousness doesn't need improvement or validation. Your experience doesn't need to serve purposes beyond its own immediate presence. You can simply be here, now, aware and alive in this moment, and that is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. The universe holds you gently in its vast indifference, and in that indifference lies perfect freedom. Freedom to create your own meanings, choose your own purposes, appreciate your own experiences. Freedom to be exactly who you are in this moment while remaining open to whoever you might become. Freedom to find the sacred in the mundane, the profound in the simple, the meaningful in the apparently meaningless. Rest in this freedom tonight. Let it cradle your consciousness as you drift toward dreams, and know that whatever emerges from this exploration, whether insight or confusion, peace or questioning, acceptance or continued seeking, all of it is perfectly valid. All of the ongoing adventure of it is part of being consciously alive in an endlessly mysterious. The darkness existence that surrounds us is not empty but full, not void but pregnant with possibility. In this darkness, consciousness rests and renews itself, preparing for whatever tomorrow might bring while finding perfect completion in this eternal now. Sleep well in the beautiful meaninglessness that makes all meaning possible. Dream well in the fertile emptiness that gives birth to every experience. Rest well in the gentle nihilism that sets you free to be authentically, joyfully, peacefully yourself. And so we find ourselves in the final movements of our nihilistic symphony, where the absence of predetermined harmony allows each note to ring with its own chosen resonance. Here, in this space we've carved from the wilderness of inherited meaning, we can begin to understand how the philosophy of nothingness, paradoxically, becomes a philosophy of everything that matters to you personally. Picture yourself as a gardener who has spent years clearing an overgrown plot of land. The work has been patient and sometimes difficult, removing invasive plants, pulling up roots that ran deep, clearing away debris that others had left behind. Now, finally, you stand before a patch of clean earth, dark and fertile, waiting for whatever seeds you choose to plant. The emptiness of the cleared ground isn't barren, it's potential incarnate. This is where nihilistic understanding ultimately leads us, not to a wasteland of despair, but to the recognition that we are gardeners of meaning in the plot of our own existence. The soil doesn't dictate what must grow there. The earth doesn't demand specific flowers or forbid certain vegetables. It simply provides the conditions for whatever you consciously choose to cultivate. Some days you might plant practical things, meanings that help you navigate daily life with greater skill and less suffering. Other days you might sow purely aesthetic seeds, purposes that serve no function beyond their own beauty. Sometimes you might experiment with exotic varieties of significance that you've never tried before, curious to see how they might flourish in your particular climate of consciousness. The beauty of this metaphorical garden lies not in achieving some perfect landscape design, but in the ongoing relationship between gardener and soil, between your choosing consciousness and the fertile emptiness that receives your choices. Each season brings new possibilities. Each year you learn more about what grows well in your particular conditions and what requires more care than you're willing to provide. Consider how this transforms the very act of decision-making. Choices no longer carry the weight of potentially violating cosmic law or missing your predetermined destiny. Instead, they become experiments in possibility, ways of exploring what it might feel like to orient your life around different values and priorities. The stakes feel simultaneously lower and higher. Lower because no external authority is judging your performance. Higher because you're fully responsible for creating the life you actually want, can feel overwhelming at live. This responsibility first, like being handed the keys to a vast library and told you can read anything you want, in any order, for any reason. Where do you even begin when everything is possible and nothing is required? The freedom can create a kind of paralysis until you realize that the choice of where to start is itself part of the adventure. You can begin anywhere, with anything that captures your current interest or addresses your immediate needs. The nihilistic approach to values reveals itself as particularly liberating here. Instead of trying to discover what you should care about according to external authorities, you can simply notice what you do care about when all the social pressure is removed. What captures your attention when you're not trying to impress anyone? What activities engage your energy when you're not performing for imaginary audiences? What relationships feel nourishing when they're not serving predetermined functions? These authentic preferences, emerging from the quiet depths of your being, rather than the noisy surface of social expectations, become the raw materials for constructing a life that feels genuinely yours. They don't need validation from others or justification through abstract principles. They simply need to be acknowledged, honoured, and given space to express themselves in your daily choices. The process of discovering authentic preferences is subtle and ongoing. Like learning to distinguish between different flavours in a complex meal, it requires patient attention and willingness to notice subtle differences. Some preferences announce themselves immediately. You know instantly whether you enjoy someone's company or find a particular activity engaging. Others reveal themselves gradually, requiring sustained attention to detect their quiet presence beneath louder, more obvious reactions. This attunement to your authentic responses can transform how you navigate social situations. Instead of automatically agreeing with others or reflexively opposing them, you can take time to sense what you actually think and feel about whatever is being discussed. Your opinions become expressions of your genuine perspective, rather than performances of what you think you should believe. or strategic positions designed to achieve social outcomes. The same authentic responsiveness can guide how you spend your time and energy. Work becomes a conscious choice about how to exchange your life force for resources and experiences, rather than an obligation you must fulfill to justify your existence. Relationships become gardens you tend because their flowering brings you joy, rather than contracts you maintain out of duty or fear. Leisure becomes genuine rest and play rather than recovery time needed to maintain productivity. This conscious curation of your life experience doesn't require dramatic gestures or revolutionary changes. It can unfold through small daily choices made with slightly more awareness of what you're actually choosing and why. The cumulative effect of these minor adjustments in direction can be profound, like a ship changing course by just a few degrees and ending up in a completely different destination. The nihilistic understanding of personal growth continues to reveal its gentleness as we explore these practical applications. Development doesn't need to follow prescribed paths or achieve predetermined outcomes. You can grow simply because consciousness enjoys expanding its capacities, exploring new territories of experience, discovering what it's capable of becoming. The growth becomes playful rather than effortful, curious rather than driven. This organic approach to development can be more sustainable than improvement motivated by inadequacy or external pressure. When you're not trying to fix what's wrong with you, or become someone else's idea of who you should be, you can work with your actual capacities and inclinations more skillfully. The process becomes collaborative rather than combative, working with your nature rather than against it. Consider how this might transform your relationship with your own limitations and challenges. Instead of seeing personal difficulties as problems to be solved or failures to be overcome, you can approach them as information about your current capacities and the conditions that support your well-being. The limitations become part of your unique landscape, rather than obstacles to some idealized version of yourself. This accepting relationship with your own humanity can reduce the internal conflict that often consumes so much energy in traditional approaches to self-improvement. When you stop fighting against aspects of yourself that you can't or don't want to change, that energy becomes available for more creative and satisfying pursuits. The resistance dissolves, replaced by a more fluid responsiveness to what's actually present in your experience. The nihilistic approach to creativity continues to offer rich possibilities for exploration. When artistic expression doesn't need to serve beauty or truth or social improvement, it becomes pure play, consciousness exploring its own capacity for generating new experiences and forms. You can create simply because creating feels like a natural function of awareness, encountering its own infinite potential. This freedom from external validation can unleash tremendous creative energy because it removes the fear of creating something inadequate or meaningless. When your art doesn't need to be great or lasting or appreciated by others, you can experiment more boldly, express more authentically, play more freely with whatever wants to emerge through your particular configuration of consciousness and skill. The creative process becomes valuable for its own sake rather than for the products it generates. The painting matters less than the experience of moving colour around canvas. The poem becomes less important than the pleasure of arranging words into new configurations. The song serves its purpose in the moment of creation, regardless of whether anyone ever hears it. This shift can transform how you approach the sharing of creative work as well. Instead of creating in order to communicate specific messages or achieve particular effects on others, you can create for the joy of creation and then offer the results as gifts with no strings attached. The reception becomes secondary to the expression, interesting rather than crucial. The understanding extends to how you engage with others' creative expressions. Art doesn't need to teach you lessons or inspire you to be a better person to be worth experiencing. You can appreciate creativity simply because conscious beings making something from nothing is intrinsically fascinating. The engagement becomes pure rather than utilitarian, appreciative rather than evaluative. The nihilistic perspective on learning and intellectual exploration reveals new dimensions as we examine its practical applications. Knowledge doesn't need to make you smarter or more cultured or better equipped for future challenges to be worth pursuing. You can explore ideas simply because exploration satisfies something essential in your nature, because consciousness enjoys stretching itself around new concepts and possibilities. This can make learning more joyful and sustainable, because it removes the pressure to retain everything or apply knowledge immediately. You can read widely without worrying about becoming an expert in any particular field. You can study subjects that have no practical application in your daily life simply because they expand your sense of what's possible in human experience. The same principle applies to how you engage with questions and mysteries. Instead of feeling frustrated by things you don't understand or anxious about areas of ignorance, you can appreciate not knowing as a space of ongoing possibility. The questions become companions rather than problems, invitations for continued exploration rather than sources of intellectual inadequacy. This comfortable relationship with uncertainty can extend to how you navigate major life decisions and transitions. When outcomes don't need to conform to predetermined plans, you can approach changes with greater curiosity and less anxiety. The unknown becomes interesting rather than threatening, full of potential rather than danger. The nihilistic understanding of service and contribution offers particularly practical wisdom for daily life. Acts of kindness and care don't need to be motivated by moral obligations or spiritual practices to be genuine expressions of your authentic nature. You can help others simply because their well-being feels connected to your own sense of what makes existence worthwhile. This natural generosity can be more sustainable than service, driven by duty or guilt, because it emerges from genuine appreciation rather than external pressure. You can give what you have available without depleting yourself trying to meet impossible standards of universal compassion. The giving becomes an expression of abundance rather than sacrifice, joy rather than obligation. The practice extends to how you receive help and support from others. When assistance doesn't create debt or obligation, you can accept care more gracefully. The receiving becomes part of the natural flow of resources and attention that sustains conscious life rather than evidence of personal inadequacy or failure to be self-sufficient. This reciprocal flow of care and resources can create more authentic communities because the connections are based on genuine appreciation rather than social contracts or mutual obligation. You can choose to participate in collective efforts because they align with your authentic values rather than because participation is required or expected. As we approach the culmination of our exploration, we begin to see how nihilistic understanding functions not as a philosophy to be believed, but as a practice to be lived. It's less like adopting a new worldview and more like learning to use your consciousness more skillfully, more authentically, more creatively. The practice involves developing what we might call existential sensitivity, the ability to distinguish between what feels imposed and what feels chosen, between what serves your authentic development and what serves external expectations, between what emerges from your genuine nature and what represents unconscious conditioning. This sensitivity develops gradually through attention and practice, like learning to taste the subtle differences between various wines or to hear the individual instruments in a complex musical arrangement. At first, everything might seem to blend together into a general sense of experience, but with patient attention, you begin to notice distinctions, preferences, authentic responses that were always there but hidden beneath louder, more obvious reactions. And so our gentle journey through nihilistic understanding draws to its natural close, like a river finally reaching the vast ocean it was always flowing toward. Tonight, we've walked together through territories that many fear to enter, discovering not the wasteland of despair that nihilism is often painted to be, but a fertile clearing where authentic meaning can finally take root. We've seen how the apparent nothingness that nihilism reveals is actually the spaciousness that makes everything possible, how emptying the gallery of inherited meanings allows us to see the beauty of existence itself, how releasing the burden of cosmic purpose frees us to create purposes that truly resonate with who we are. As you drift into sleep, carry with you this gentle recognition. You're not broken and in need of fixing, not lost and in need of finding, not empty and in need of filling. Your consciousness itself, temporarily arranged in this particular form, free to create whatever meanings feel authentic to your unique perspective on the mystery of being alive. The universe doesn't require your justification. Your choices don't need external validation. Your existence is enough, has always been enough, will always be enough. Rest in this beautiful meaninglessness that makes all chosen meaning possible. Dream well, gentle philosopher, in the fertile darkness where all possibilities sleep.